Hello, welcome to today's first ever Vasculitis Women's Conference. I'm Joyce Coleman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vasculitis Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. It is wonderful to have so many participants ready to connect and learn from our incredible speakers and from each other. Our goal for today is to develop a greater understanding of how vasculitis impacts women in all aspects of life and to build upon the collective strength of our community through education and connection with other patients living with vasculitis. This conference was recorded live on June 12, 2021. We have edited the 5 sessions into individual webinars and encourage you to watch all of them as you have time. Each session is unique and all of the speakers share important knowledge and expertise. My co-host for today's conference is Kaylin Young, the Director of Development and Communications with the Vasculitis Foundation. Kaylin has her master's degree in social justice and human rights, specializing in qualitative research methodologies. She served as the Director of Research Affairs for the Vasculitis Patient-Powered Research Network, our VPPRN, for the 7 years prior to May 2021. Kaylin has dedicated her career to patient engagement in clinical research and has a deep passion for elevating the patient voice in research design, implementation, and development. Also joining us today on the conference and working in the background is Ed Becker, our VF media producer. Ed produces the VF Road to Wellness webinar series and the Vasculitis Visionary podcast, featuring conversations with medical specialists from around the world. He also serves as co-producer on a new podcast series, the ACR VF Guidelines, which will be launched later this summer. And we want to especially thank our sponsors, Amgen, Genentech, and GSK, for their support of our 2021 Patient Virtual Conference Series. The title of today's session is Pieces of Mind, Mental Health and the Emotional Impact of Vasculitis. I am pleased to introduce our speakers for this session. Dr. Velma Mockett is a practicing mental health consultant specialist, counseling patients with anxiety, depression, grief, and loss with chronic illness, trauma, and addiction. Dr. Mockett also helps companies implement mental health training in the workplace and has presented workshops on a variety of topics. Velma is also a patient living with vasculitis and recently hosted a webinar series with the VF discussing ways to manage loss and grief emotions such as depression, sadness, anger, guilt, and confusion, and their impact on patients with vasculitis. Stacy Ivitz is a registered social worker with a master's of social work and is guided by previous work in healthcare, addictions, and eating disorders, providing counseling and psychotherapy services in Ontario, Canada. Stacy is also a patient with EGPA and currently serves as a lead patient partner for the VCRC VPPRN EGPA Steering Committee.
Now we're going to move on to a different part of, the impact of vasculitis on women's health in a more kind of almost holistic way. We're going to look at mental health and how that, and with 2 of our patient experts who happen to be experts in the mental health field, as well as being patients and experts in their own disease experience, which I'm sure is very relatable. So I'm going to pull up a couple of our questions that we had. There we go. So pieces of mind, mental health and the emotional impact of vasculitis. So first, I just want to ask if Velma and Stacey wouldn't mind sharing kind of your own personal story as well as your professional background and kind of how those 2 things merged in this space. And then we'll jump into some of these questions that, again, like several of our other sessions, have been submitted by our community members that were real concerns that we kind of felt that would address mental health in a general way, would be specific enough that it would give you some things to think about as you move forward through your day and gain some insight. So Velma, Stacey, would you like to introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about your story?
Sure. Velma, did you want to go first, or?
No, you can go ahead.
All right. So I'm Stacy. I'm a social worker, actually, and I work in private practice now. But I've had symptoms of vasculitis since I was 12 years old, and I was finally diagnosed when I was 17. I have EGPA, but since diagnosis, I've been on many different treatments and have had periods of stability and wellness at different points, and then also flare-up and complications too. But it's kind of informed my practice and how I work with folks. And right now I specialize in working with people who have chronic illness, not just specifically vasculitis, but different types of illness, pain, and trauma. And I also have 2 kids who are 8.5 and 7, and I've been married for like 10 years almost. And that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm Velma. I am also a vasculitis patient, but a mental health expert. So I got diagnosed in 2015, and it was a long journey getting there. So I was sick, I think, about 3 or 4 years prior to that, and just having a lot of symptoms and going to doctors. And, you know, of course, the typical story that most of us hear is that it's in your head, until I finally got, biopsied and diagnosed. And since then, I also have Koppel-Cocker immune disease. I also have Addison's disease, so that's making life a little bit more complicated for me. I have a many flare-up, never been in remission. I've had lots of complications and lots of hospitalizations and things like that. But like Stacey said, I think my, being a patient has also informed my practice. I do both private practice and I work also for an agency, so that's informed quite a bit the way that I talk to patients, but also the way that I also support like medical teams to talk to patients. So I've started different initiatives, and one of the ones that we started is doing it right, outcomes that matter for patients. So talking to doctors, I work with on that initiative of a hospital, and just talking to doctors about how to better treat patient and work with patient and things like that. So that's essentially me in a nutshell. I am in Calgary, Canada, for those of you wondering where I'm at. I'm looking forward. I'm thankful to be part of this, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Well, thank you both so much. So what we thought was, with this session, we were going to do a little bit more of a panel discussion to get both of your perspectives in response to some of these questions. So I'll pose the first question, and then if you want to provide your response, and then Velma yours, that would be fantastic. So how do I balance being with the many roles I play as a mother, a partner, working, and managing my disease?
Okay, so that is definitely something I've struggled with over the years, and it's had to change at different life stages too. So balancing my health and, going to school, university, so high school first, school, and then university and grad school, I've had to use different strategies. And then when I became a mom and a partner, it got a lot more complicated, I have to say. And so how I have found, and what I work with a lot of folks around, is figuring out what's really the most important, what your values are for you personally, because each person's a bit different, creating priorities. And I use a lot of scheduling tools in order to kind of attend to each part that matters to me. And that things like spending time with my kids or taking a nap are because I need to, are equally as important as working or attending a doctor's appointment or taking my medication. So valuing them in the same way, because otherwise I'll push off things that, are values to me, but, society maybe doesn't tell me are as important. And then also looking at some of the things I get told I should care about that I really don't. Like, I don't like to clean my house, and I'm fortunate that I hire someone to do that. It also hurts me and causes a lot of chronic pain. And I have a partner who supports that as well. So figuring out what it is that I'm going to spend my time on that I have when I can't, and what I'm going to do about that. So it really depends on a lot of communication. And I also work with my own therapist. So I'm a therapist, but I also talk to someone who's a professional in order to kind of manage all of these different things. Velma?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't think I can speak to the mother part because I'm not a mom. But, having had a lot of, patients, clients that are balancing those roles, I know that, for me, in terms of balancing my role, I'll echo some of the things that Stacey has said. It's about a lot of time management for me and trying to figure out like what my priorities are and making sure that my priorities are the things that are really important to me and setting really smart goals so that I am not having unrealistic expectations of myself. It's also about, communicating a lot with the people that are around you and providing, having good structure and a good environment around you. When you can educate the people that are around you on your disease, they will know better how to support you. So I would say, like, for a lot of my patients, I really try to help them to sort of educate their partners or their spouse, their children, so that they can get the support that they need. When we hide what we're feeling and what we're thinking, then people are left to make assumptions about, what we need, and they always get it wrong when they make assumptions. So the way to balance that is to make sure, you do a lot of good time management. There are lots of tools out there that you can use. I also use a therapist, even if I'm a mental health expert. I do use a therapist myself. I have a standing appointment once a month that helps. She keeps me in check and make sure that I'm not overdoing things. I use the spoon theory, for those of you who have heard about the spoon theory, to help me to make sure that I'm managing my day well. And just to kind of figure out like when it's a day for you to rest and when it's a day for you to just kind of do work. So it's about kind of listening to your body as well. If your body is really telling you it's really too tired, then not pushing your body and things like that. So it really takes a lot of balancing act, because vasculitis changes, it disrupts the plot in your life. It changes everything. It also changes the power dynamics in any relationship, which means that, things change and you have to be willing and to accept that and relinquish some of the roles that you typically would play and allow your partner, your children, and, your family, your friends to kind of come in and support you as well. So that's some of the kinds of things that I know some of my patients have been doing. And for me, again, it's sort of recognizing when I can make my bed and when I can't make it and when I need to ask for help. Recognizing when I can vacuum and not vacuum. Just really recognizing when I just need to take a whole day to just rest. And being okay with that and not being so hard on myself. So part of balancing those things is having compassion for yourself and also just being kind and gentle with yourself as well.
Yeah, and can I add on a little bit? And also being kind and gentle to the people around you, because they don't know unless, like Donna was saying, unless you communicate with them what it's like. So when you ask for help, explaining it is really important.
That's interesting. It reminds me of kind of what Jen Gordon was saying also with your physician, right? To kind of plan some of those things out or come up with, how to describe those things. Do either of you find that it is difficult, at least, well, I can speak for myself, but I find it difficult to sometimes identify how I'm feeling. And so sharing that out also becomes a challenge. And then it's, kind of the cycle of frustration. And I think sometimes, especially navigating lots of different roles and having chronic illness, that becomes very almost silencing, and then you get really frustrated. So do you have some ways or ideas around how to better articulate or identify kind of what you're really feeling in a particular situation?
Well, I think part of that is, society has taught us that some emotions are good and some are bad, which in fact, no emotion is better than the other. Or society tells us that some emotions are negative and some are positive. None of them are negative or positive. So part of that is understanding really the true nature of what emotions really are. And really, when you understand what emotions are and what they're not, when you start to realize that emotions are not who you are. So for example, if you feel angry, you perhaps would be afraid to tell your husband or your partner or your children that you're feeling angry because for fear of them thinking that you're an angry person. But when you come to realize that, feeling angry is not who you are, it liberates you, because now you can actually express that emotion without necessarily having an identity to that emotion. And I think it's just kind of understanding what emotions really are and learning to change the language of how we articulate emotion as opposed to saying I am. Start, begin that language where you make that shift to say I feel as opposed to I am, because there's always that we feel. So oftentimes when my patients tell me, I just don't want to feel frustrated anymore. So I often joke with them, and then they quite get it. I'll say to them, well, it sounds like you have dead people's skull. Only dead people don't feel. And then they laugh. But they get it, because it's like, well, if you don't want to feel anything, it means that you're not alive. As long as you're alive and existing, you are exposed to all elements of the environment. You are going to feel something. So it's about really understanding that and being able to be okay But always remember, when you feel something, it's not the emotion that is destructive, it's the behavior. So if you feel frustrated and you throw something at your partner, then the frustration didn't do that. You did, right? So it's recognizing that it's the behavior that becomes destructive. So if you can regulate what you feel, articulate it, but still regulate it, maybe go and do some, breathing or go for a walk, do some mindfulness stuff, then that helps you to sort of regulate that emotion better. So it's really about trying to understand what emotions are. When you understand something and you have knowledge of it, knowledge again is power, then you'll be able to make better choices.
Yeah, I think that's been really helpful for me as well. And when I work with clients, I change how I talk about emotions with people, and it's based on how I've changed how I feel about them. So my relationship to emotions themselves, instead of seeing them as something that interrupts or gets in the way of my goal. If it's like frustration or anxiety, it's seeing it as a communicator, like a secret messenger. It's telling me something. What's it telling me? So really understanding the role of each emotion and how it can communicate, and kind of noticing. So that's a word I like to use with my clients is, I notice frustration. I notice that I'm feeling frustrated because. And using the because word to kind of validate what it is, and slow down a little bit.
Yeah, another thing I teach patients is I tell them every emotion have a language. So it's like, what is this telling you? And I also talk about the power of emotions and what they tell you in the power. So for example, when a patient says to me, I just feel angry all the time, I say to them, well, anger has restorative power. So usually when we feel angry, it's because we feel that something has been made vulnerable, or something has been offended, or something is, there's hurt. So what's the hurt that's there? What's been made vulnerable? Are you afraid of feeling vulnerable? And then you can have a better, kind of discussion, because you deconstruct emotions a bit to get people to actually talk about what's underneath the iceberg. So I typically will use like an iceberg to say, okay, let's talk about what's underneath the iceberg, because we can see what's above the iceberg, what's underneath. And sometimes it's that powerlessness, that helplessness that vasculitis can often make us feel, because it's unpredictable. And the only thing that's predictable about vasculitis is unpredictability. So, so that can render people powerless. And so it's about just talking about what you're feeling and really not being afraid of emotion. I think first is to just start by not being afraid of emotion and recognizing that as long as you're existing, you'll always feel something. And it's important to just kind of allow yourself to feel and talk about what you're feeling. And when you can do that and not identify yourself by the emotion.
Those are some really great walkaways. I mean, so some of the things that I heard are identifying, first changing your language around it. So that's something that everyone can practice instead of I am, I feel, to deconstructing or viewing and not in terms of positive or negative. And then looking at emotions as the iceberg, right? Like, what is it communicating to me? So if anger was an interesting example. I could see that very much, that it is protecting a vulnerability. So what's behind that, and how are you feeling? And then being able to share that out with those that you care about and that are around you, and those you just interact with on a daily basis. Did that capture kind of some of the walkways we can provide everyone?
I think so. In relation to that question, the other piece is the roles, balancing the roles specifically, and how that ties into people's expectations, and how that ties in with potentially personal expectations or feeling not enough or too much because of illness. So I think that might also come up with some of the other questions later. But that kind of overwhelm, that's related to expectations, and then really figuring out your own values in order to choose which expectations you want to meet and which ones you're giving back. Yeah.
Yeah, so that leads us very nicely into our next question, which is that I feel overwhelmed when I think about this being a chronic disease. And I never know when I might flare. How do I regulate my emotions of anxiety and depression around that?
I think, because again, vasculitis is a disruptor and it changes the plot. It changes how your life trajectory is going. You constantly feel like you're in pain, or either you're vomiting or you're in fatigue, and you have all the symptoms of the other medications that's, happening as well. So it is only sort of natural that you will feel overwhelmed. And part of that is about learning some mindfulness strategy, learning some restorative care, and really learning breath work. When you start to feel overwhelmed, part of feeling overwhelmed, if it goes on, is that you're eventually going to feel anxious. And when you feel anxious, you'll start panicking. So, and sometimes part of what gets there, because vasculitis is unpredictable, then we start to do what we call what if statement. What if this doesn't get better? Or we start to do, all of those things are what we call thinking traps. We start to kind of become more pessimistic about our life outcome, or we start to do emotional reasoning. We start to reason by our emotions. And so that can get us in that sort of trap where we end up now feeling very anxious. And then eventually, if that goes on for a long time, we can sometimes experience symptoms of depression. So I think part of that is learning that, like I said earlier, the only consistent thing is vasculitis is that it's unpredictable. And so once you get to that place where you can accept that, then you begin to become more comfortable with the uncomfortableness that it presents for you. And when you can start doing that, you start to kind of begin to learn mindfulness strategy, you begin to learn restorative care movement, learn good breath work. And so some of the things that I do is just simple things as doing breath work can help sort of like elongate the muscle and open up a space so that you can get more oxygen flowing within your body. You can move the muscles a little bit, and then you'll feel like, you can think clearly. When you can't really think clearly and you're overwhelmed, then you can't think clearly. And so you're more likely to get anxious. So it's about not getting into that sort of hypothetical kind of thinking pattern where you're doing what if and if only and all of those kinds of things, and just recognizing where you're at and being okay with where you're at, being okay with feeling certain things, but also being able to do some things to help you move through that state and that you're not staying stuck there. So the thing is not that you feel anxious, is that are you staying stuck there? Right. So what you want to do is being able to use your breathing. Like you can do something as simple as lying on the floor, placing your feet on a chair and just breathing, place your hands on your abdomen and just, breathe. Or you can put your hands under some cold water and just focus on your breath until you start to feel kind of like your system is getting a little bit more relaxed. Always remember, if you calm your system down, you will calm your mind down. Something as simple as taking a shower and listening to some music while you're taking a shower will calm your brain down. And that will calm your system down. So just learning simple strategies that are mindful and restorative, and doing some integrative care will help with, sort of regulating your emotions as well.
Yes. And so like noticing that you're getting overwhelmed, right? So for folks to kind of notice that it's happening, that can be sometimes the point where you have access to choices before you're so flooded that you're in a panic attack. And so a term I like to work with folks around is their window of tolerance. So like knowing that when you're in the window, you're able to make good choices and able to like have various experiences and notice different things. But when you go outside your window of tolerance, you're like either having a panic attack or you're kind of numbed out. And so just being able to know if you're in or outside that window and what might help you stay or get back into it. So sensory experiences can be really helpful if you notice that you're already out of your ability to think through things logically or rationally, and to kind of reconnecting with the moment by putting your feet on the floor or touching something like having a fidget toy. Things like that can even be helpful, and use them with kids, but it's also good for adults. So it's not one or the other. And temperature, like Velma was saying, choosing either like an ice pack to really, or a cold glass of water or a hot tea, like whatever you find more soothing.
Yeah. If I just can add something, another way to gauge your emotion is so you can use a scale of 1 to 10, like the doctors do in their office, and they ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your pain? So if you use a scale of 1 to 10 to gauge the intensity of the emotion you're feeling, that also helps you to know, what kind of thing you can apply. So if you go, for example, from 1 to 4, you say that's mild anxiety, and then from 5 to 7, it's moderate, and then 8 to 10. If you're already scoring at a 7, that's your cue that perhaps you need to do some breathing strategy, or perhaps you need to use some cold water. Or you can also begin to count backwards from 100 in groups of 3s, 4s, or 7 to kind of, because our mind really can only think of one thing at a time. So you kind of distract the thought process. So, I use that a lot to sort of gauge where I'm at. And sometimes it's just letting yourself feel. And if you realize that you're feeling anxious, you can just let yourself feel anxious for a little bit and see, and let your body just move through that space instead of trying to just completely get rid of that emotion. So it's kind of like just kind of gauging where you are some of the time, and or sometimes I use it with my patient that the sort of like red, yellow, green zone. So zone of regulation. And then you can sort of use that and say, okay, if I am in the yellow zone, that's a cue that I may get in a red zone. So let me begin to do some sort of thing. Let me call a friend. So I can distract myself and laugh. Things like that can often help you as well.
Yeah, or reaching out to talk to someone. So either a partner, a loved one, a therapist, a helpline, connecting in order to kind of get support. And maybe it's not even to talk about the anxiety necessarily, it's to feel connected again. It just depends on what's most helpful at that time and knowing yourself.
Again, it's about going back to the language of emotion. Like when you're feeling anxious, what is it telling you? What needs to be restored? What are you afraid of? Perhaps you're afraid of, you may have an upcoming appointment and you may be afraid of what your result might say. So you want to ask yourself, what's going on for me here, and take stock of your environment, your internal space, as well as your external space, and see what's going on for you. And when you can get to the root cause of what's causing the anxiety, you're better able to deal with that. So it's about kind of looking at, what's the language of the emotion as well.
And then also kind of dealing with that constant uncertainty. And I might have a different perspective on this than folks that developed vasculitis in adulthood, because I kind of grew up with it. I don't know adult life without it. So dealing with that constant, what's going to happen? I try to structure my life around a moderate day. So I don't plan my life for when I'm well. I plan my life for when I have some symptoms and build it around there to kind of bring things a bit lower as far as my expectations go. So that means like I only have my office space here 2 days a week, and I do it when I don't have to parent because my husband's home with the kids Fridays and Saturdays. So that it's very intentional to kind of pace myself and build in self-care strategies that I can do even if I have pain or even if I'm tired, really building around that so that it's not that sense of overwhelm because there's so much going on. It's how I've had to build my life. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I build my life around quality of life. I look at what's quality of life for me. And so the key question I ask myself is what does quality of life mean for me? And what does healing mean for me? And so it's about like managing my day and making sure that I'm not putting too many things in my day, even if I want to do things. So for example, if somebody asks me to do something on a Saturday, if I already have one thing planned, then that's all I'm going to do on that Saturday. I'll tell that person, well, I'm sorry, I already have plans for Saturday, even if it's just one thing. Can we perhaps do it next Saturday? So I don't try to live the same life that I had before vasculitis. Is recognizing that the life that I had is gone. Those losses are already losses, and trying to sort of grieve those losses and moving past them. So I plan my life in a way that is not a lot of incoming stimulation. Remember, the more incoming stimulations that you have is the more overwhelmed the brain is going to feel. And if the brain feels overwhelmed, then you're likely going to feel anxious. So it's about minimizing all the sort of incoming stimulation that I have coming through. And talking to my friends, most of my friends know what my day looks like. And so, for example, if my friends won't call me after 5 or something like that, because they know, I won't be in a capacity to think at that point. So it's really having conversation with the people around you so that they know what works for you and when to support you and when not to support you and things like that. So all of those kinds of things are things to kind of think about, like what kind of quality of life do I want to have? What are my priorities? What are the expectations that are on me? Do I want to live up to all these expectations? As you minimize your incoming stimulation, so too will the anxiety and the depressive symptom minimize as well.
Actually, a really good segue into that third question, which is how do I get over not wanting to ask for help with things that I used to be able to do myself and now I can't? It's embarrassing and I feel ashamed when I can't do normal everyday things.
Yeah, so I think this is such an important question. It's a really big area. Like I think we could probably have 3 or 4 hours just on this. The work that I do with folks. So there's the fact that we're kind of encountering, the changing abilities and how it is unpredictable, like we've been talking about, and all of the emotions that go with that and the grief. But then there's also the shame. and what is that and where does it come from? And it also ties with what Jen was talking about in her thing about assertiveness, and how men and women, or people born in these bodies, are kind of socialized in different ways, and certain things are okay and other things aren't, and where we find and feel and shame around advocating, or asking for help with basic things, or even in our closest relationships, who's allowed to ask for help and what kind of help and what does that look like? So this is, to me, it's a really big question. What are your thoughts, Velma?
Well, when you start talking about shame, like you said, it's a really big topic, and it's something, you can have an entire session on. But I think the key thing to kind of take away from this is that shame is a very powerful emotion, particularly in chronic illness encounters. Like, it's one of the experiences that most people have in chronic illness. And part of the reason for that is when you think of a chronic illness like vasculitis, it really breaks the boundaries from an internal space. And it also, sort of like, it changes the plot of your life. And shame, as it is, because society has taught us that some emotions are good and some are bad, and some are negative and some are positive. Shame is one of the emotions that people see as very negative. And part of the reason for that is because with shame comes judgment. It's usually you feel ashamed because you're judging yourself, or because you perceive that someone else is judging you, right? And so it's a very self-conscious type of emotion. And so it can become an emotion that can be kind of destructive in the sense that, you're constantly judging yourself and constantly thinking about, because it disrupts the things that you used to do before and the things that you think you should be doing, even if, you perhaps should not even be worrying about that, but it really gets you, because it's so self-conscious, it gets you to kind of think about, what I should be doing. So for example, if you feel like I should be washing the dishes, or I should be able to clean the house, but I am feeling too exhausted to do that, you eventually get to the place where you can feel kind of embarrassed about that. And the other thing about shame is that it causes us to be very silent about how we're feeling, because the embarrassment that comes with shame, because it's almost like an umbrella of emotion. And so what I get patients to think about is, when you feel that shame, what is it bypassing for? Because you can use shame to bypass things like guilt and things like anger and things like, sorrow and so many other emotions that you can be using shame as a bypass for, that you're not speaking about. And because people are so silent about shame, it can really be isolating. So it's to be mindful about, when I feel those things, what other things am I feeling, and how, and am I judging myself, and am I judging myself too unkindly? Am I just very self-conscious about the things that I used to do now I can't do? Or am I perceiving that other people are judging me? Or are they actually really judging me? And if they are, can I have a discussion with them about that and what my capacities are? So it's about being clear about what your capacities are right now, as opposed to what it used to be, because sometimes we can cling on to what used to be. So it's important to let go of what used to be and start to grasp onto what is. And so that you can be in the moment, and that way, when you are in the moment and you know what your capabilities are in the moment, then you're not necessarily judging yourself about what you can do. I mean, now that I know I'm always constantly exhausted, I know that, vacuuming is not something I can do all the time, or even simple as making my bed is not something I can do all the time. I mean, yesterday my sister made my bed for me, right? So it's not something I can do all the time. So it's just being okay with that. In the beginning, of course, when you're just diagnosed, you feel horrible to ask someone, can you make my bed, please? Or you can't vacuum, or you can't cook, and you feel like you have kids and all of those things. And you feel, obviously you're going to feel bad that, your husband or your partner is doing all the work. But it's coming to some kind of discussion about, what you're feeling, as opposed to holding it in, because shame on its own can kind of cause you to hold things in. And then that's when you end up getting to a place of depression and stuff like that. So it's just being mindful about what it is. But the other flip side of the coin is that shame can also be a very, powerful emotion to move you through your grief. Because if you can talk about the anger that you feel, you can talk about the despair that you feel, you can talk about the guilt that you feel, it can actually be quite constructive in getting you to move through grief. So it's not all bad. It's about not allowing it to let you be silent. It becomes destructive when you allow it to be silent and you allow it to be just judgmental. But if you can actually talk about the emotions that you're bypassing, it can actually be a very constructive emotion.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is that you get underneath what's underneath that, to communicate with your partners in care and work with that.
Lisa, so I agree. I think this is so important. So thank you both for sharing your perspectives on these. It triggers several other questions. If you don't mind, I open it up to some of the other things that have come in since we've been chatting. But one was, let me scroll up a little bit. So no one seems to understand that I had a disease.
Welcome to both
I
of
looked
you.
fine.
Tracy and Vala.
Finding vasculitis support group really helped. So finding the support group really helped, and finding a therapist really helped as well. Saying you need help is the hardest part. Can you kind of speak to that? Like, how do we get over that hurdle, or what is a helpful kind of way of getting over the that hurdle of, you know, saying that you need help? So kind of going back to this where we're noticing, but then once you, all right, so I identify as feeling shame, and I can kind of explore what's underneath that. How do I then move that forward, right? To say that you need help.
So sometimes it's witnessing it with someone who you know you can trust, whether that's your doctor or care provider, or if it's your family member or someone else, or within a support group setting, if you already have that in place. So having witness to the fact that you know you need help, and then making a plan to actually find the next step. What is it? Figure out what works for you.
I think part of it too is about, again, going back to letting go. It's about letting go of what was and getting acceptance of what is, and accepting that you're impacted by vasculitis doesn't mean that your life is completely over. It doesn't mean, you know, that you're not existing. It's just accepting that there are certain things about a disease that you can't change. So I try to focus on my control circle. What can I change? I can change my thought, my feelings. You know, I can change my behavior, my opinions about things, my actions, my decisions, my attitude. And so trying to stay focused on the things that are within your sphere of influence is important in this process. But also recognizing that, you know, there's also power in vulnerability. So part of being afraid to ask for help is because we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be, that exposes us. And so vasculitis exposes vulnerability. And so it's about, you know, recognizing that there's power in vulnerability as well. Asking for help is part of being strong. The last group I was talking to, I said to them, one of my favorite quotes from Mandela is, you know, courage is fear walking. So, you know, it doesn't mean that because you feel fear that you're not courageous. It doesn't mean that because you ask for help that you're not strong. I think society has taught us that if we're asking for help, we're not strong. But asking for help is a sign of strength, because it's recognizing that you're beyond your capacities, you're going past, your boundaries are broken, you're going past your limitation, and it's okay to ask for help. There's always someone that knows something or knows someone that may be able to help you. And so the first step is just letting go and accepting, you know, where your life is at right now, and then sort of like figuring out who in your environment can support you. And that's again about exploring what your external strengths are. And that's part of resilience. It's about adapting. And so if you can adapt to what's going on around you, then you can transform and become someone else. And how most times people say to me, but I've lost my sense of purpose. And I say to them, well, get another purpose. We're not meant to have just one sense of purpose. We can have many purposes. And so when you come to the realization that you don't need to have one sense of purpose, then you're not paralyzed by the fear that you feel, and you're not paralyzed by, you know, being vulnerable. In fact, being vulnerable starts to empower you to make a difference in your own life and perhaps in the life of other people with vasculitis. So I'd say, don't be afraid to ask for help.
I really like that quote. Was courage is fear walking?
Yeah, that's my favorite quote from Mandela. I use that to remind myself when I am afraid of going to you know, when I have to go see my rheumatologist and I know I'm perhaps going to get news that I don't want to know, I remind myself that courage is fear walking.
Yeah. So one of the other questions is, what is the process of integrating our chronic illness into our life so we live a fulfilling life? I'm going to do another full day session. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on each person and how their vasculitis impacts them personally. So I can speak to what I do, and I structure my days, like I said, based on like a moderate illness day, but I always attend to my sleep. It has to happen. I have to make it important. I have to eat regularly, nutritious food. It's something I actually have to pay a lot of attention to because of some of the ways that vasculitis has impacted me. And movement. And at different times in my life, that has meant different things. So I don't talk about exercise anymore. I talk about movement and what does that look like and how can I get that? And those are three things I kind of build in first. And then I go like connection and valuable work and having purpose, and go from there. But yeah, that's how I do it. And I'm sure each person has a different style that works for them.
Well, again, like for me, it goes back to, I talk to my patients about quality of life, quality of living. It goes back to what kind of quality of life do you want? And then you start from that point of, this is the quality of life that I want. So the way that I do it, again, it's going to depend on every person. Everybody have a different vasculitis. Everybody, even if you have the same vasculitis, you're impacted by it differently. Like, for example, for me, I've never been able to go in remission. So therefore, and I have a lot of GI issues, so it impacts me perhaps differently than somebody with the same type of vasculitis. Plus, I have another autoimmune disease. So all of those things, co-occurring disorders, can impact you differently. So I look at it in the sense of like, I am in the center of this circle, and then all these the environment, my doctors, all these people are around me. So I kind of look at, the people that are around me and how I can utilize them best to help me, strengthen my core self. So for example, like Stacey said, sleep is very important to me. So I'm a really early sleeper because I wake up early, so I have to go to bed early. Another thing that I do that I integrate in my day is Sundays kind of like Velma day. So I don't do anything on a Sunday. Don't answer my phone, don't talk to anyone. I watch as much Netflix as I want to and don't even guilty. So I really structure my day. Like during the week, I make sure that I don't go beyond like 4 o'clock in terms of talking to clients and things like that. So it's just really kind of figuring out what works, and it's trial and error. It took me a while to kind of figure out like why I was getting even more exhausted than I would start off, until like, my therapist and I started using that spoon theory to really help me. So then by the end of the day, I figured out how many spoons do I have left. And if my phone is ringing, I'm like, don't think so. Don't want to spend my last spoon on that phone call. So and being okay with that and not feeling guilty about certain things and not letting other people guilt trip me or decide for me what I need or what I want. So it's being able to be clear and articulate what I want and what I need, so that I can feel like I'm living a good quality of life and I can feel comfortable and confident about what I'm doing. So it's really about knowing your values, knowing what's priority for you. All of those things help you integrate that very clearly, finding good work-life balance, drinking lots of water, getting good sleep, eating good nutritious food. And then, now I'm working with a kinesiologist, and we always talk about restorative movement. And for him, it's just about, he wants me to move every day, even if it means that I just, just lie on the floor and breathe. But the idea of moving every day so that my muscles are not atrophied and that I am kind of elongating the muscles and getting enough oxygen and airflow in, and just kind of getting my body active. So it doesn't mean that I have to walk for half an hour, or I have to run. It's just about maybe just lying on my bed and breathing, or moving my legs or something, right? Just moving my body every day and making sure that I get good rest. But the rest is really, really important for me in terms of being able to integrate my life with an illness and coexisting with something that you can't change. And I just always call vasculitis my terrible roommate. So some days my roommate is acting up. And then my therapist laugh when I tell her my roommate is acting up and I don't even have space in the house anymore. So that means that I'm feeling really suffocated by vasculitis. And just being able to sometimes just laugh at yourself. My motto is laugh every day. So I try to find something that I can laugh about every day.
Velma and Stacey, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and the discussion of these incredibly important topics. I think we could go all day with just this session, but we have to move on. We also encourage everyone to watch the other 4 recorded sessions from today's conference. And we want to especially thank our sponsors, Amgen, Genentech, and GSK, for their support of our 2021 Patient Virtual Conference Series. Thank you again for joining us today.